friends, Peggy Hall back with you from thehealthyamerican.org. Many people are asking me what I think about Kennedy joining Trump in his campaign and possibly even in his administration. Some people are floating the idea that Kennedy, as I'm calling him, RFK Jr., that he could be made the head of the CDC, or he could be involved with the FDA, or he could even be the Secretary of Health and Human Services. So many of you are asking me about this. And let me just state from the get-go that I have many RFK supporters in my audience. And I think it's very important, if you support him and if you support Trump, that you listen to these questions that I have for Kennedy. And I'm not here to tell you who to vote for, and I'm not here to go after anyone. I'm here to go after the truth, especially if you are in favor of this alliance. I think it's extremely important that you ask questions like I am. And let me give you a really quick overview of his speech, where he didn't stop his campaign. He actually stated that RFK Jr. is suspending his campaign in certain states. So he still technically is still running for president. But I think a picture is worth 1,000 words. And let me show you this snapshot of the transcript of his talk. I'm not going to play the talk for you. There are plenty of news sites where you can get that. But what I did is I actually went to the transcript and I searched on certain words and I saw, look at everything in green. This is where Kennedy mentions his father and his uncle. He speaks a lot about his father and his uncle and the Kennedy DNA. He's very proud to be a Kennedy, the Kennedy legacy and lineage. And if you are not sure what that means, I think it would behoove you to dig into the Kennedy family and their story and what they stand for, which is basically big government. And maybe you stand for big government too. I don't. I stand for small government, individual liberties. I don't believe that the government has the answer to our problems. They actually are the cause of many of our problems. So you can just see at a glance. Now let's look at everything in yellow here. Yellow is where he talks about democracy. And I've got some questions for Kennedy related to these comments here, why he is mentioning democracy so frequently. I've got democracy and also children, when he mentions that the government needs to protect the children. And we'll see how many times he mentions democracy, the war on our children, and you can see that a lot with the yellow. This might be getting you seasick, so I'll stop scrolling, but I wanted to show you this is called the original source. So I'm not going to somebody else's commentary about Kennedy. I'm going to his own words. Let me also say that for those of you that saw my previous videos where I showed a compilation of Kennedy's position on the jabs, where he says that he is, and I quote, fiercely pro-vaccine. You told me that I'm taking his words out of context. Well, I don't know how I'm taking his words out of context when they're his words. And I actually have links to the longer interviews. I did a compilation because he said it so many times. And many of you told me that he said it only once and he doesn't believe that anymore. So I set about to bring you, I don't know, maybe a dozen recent times when he said that he is fiercely pro-vaccine. And I know that that is a disconnect for many people because of the work that he's done with the Children's Health Defense. But the point that I'm saying is for you to hold his feet to the fire and for you to question his stance. Don't take it from me. Listen to him. And when he says, I am fiercely pro-vaccine, why are you doubting him? Are you saying that he's a liar? Are you saying that he is being deceitful, that he's trying to hoodwink you or something? Those are his exact words. So it's up to you as a supporter to figure out where he stands on these things. So I have questions for Kennedy, and I actually have them on my phone, and I want to read a few notes that I made here. And I want to acknowledge that, yes, absolutely, hear me clearly, RFK Jr. has done a lot of work raising awareness as to the causes of many of the issues for children and childhood diseases, as he calls them, and the side effects of a lot of these jabs. Absolutely. He has done countless interviews. He has an entire website at the Children's Health Defense that has daily videos with different hosts and guests that are exposing all of the harms that parents and children and the parents of these children are experiencing when they go along with the mainstream medical merry-go-round. Are we clear? I will give him the accolades for that. However, my belief is that he doesn't go far enough in that. And I've done several videos on this channel where I've shown pages on his website where he's got a whole project and program called vaccine safety. So one of my first questions for Kennedy is, why are you speaking about vaccine safety? Why are you using the word safety? Why aren't you using the word harms or dangers or side effects? And many of you will tell me, well, it's how he gets around the censors, and it's the only way that he can get that information out there. Well, I would like to hear him give some of those caveats and explain why he does that. Another question I have for him is, why on that website does he have very little attention going to repealing these heinous laws, including the 1986 law called the Act, which actually removed liability for these pharmaceutical companies. It created a vaccine court that has limits of $250,000 for the damages. Now, those of you, and I know that there are hundreds, thousands, hundreds of thousands, and millions of parents who could email me and tell me that they have experienced with their children these harms. And they would say that $250,000 is nowhere near the amount of money that they would need in order for their child to have the correct types of tutors and other interventions to help their child succeed in life going forward. Please watch my two-part video interview with Laura Hayes, a mother who actually knows RFK Jr. and has said to me, when he calls himself fiercely pro-vaccine, that's like telling a mother of a child who died due to a drunk driver saying, I am fiercely pro-drunk driving. He has never come out on the record to state otherwise. This is what Laura Hayes has said. So that is one of my questions for Kennedy as well. Why the focus on vaccine safety? Another question, why the focus on vaccine testing? He has stated countless times that he wants to expand safety testing for the childhood jabs. I want you to think about what that means. Did you think about it? All right, I will tell you what I thought about it. That means increased jabs. If you're going to be testing this, that means more children are going to be tested on. Yes, they want to use a placebo and all these other details that they talk about, but the bottom line is increasing testing. I will have a link for you for a video that I did showing you the millions and millions of dollars that are coming out of your pocket and mine through government grants to pharmaceutical companies for testing. This call for increased safety testing enriches the pharmaceutical companies. There, I said it. I'm not going to make a claim that he's working for the pharmaceutical companies or that he's being enriched by them. I have no evidence for that whatsoever. But I will tell you the conclusion is that increased testing lines the pockets of the likes of Bill Gates and his ilk, his Gavi and other companies that he invests in and that he has started, because they're the ones that get the money. And my question is, how do you test on these products, and why are you testing on them? Can you really make poison safer? And who are these innocent children that are going to be tested on? How many children? For how long? For how many years? Can you trust the results of these pharmaceutical companies when they tell you the results of their testing? You're going to trust them? That's another question that I have. Kennedy is always talking about increasing confidence in the regulatory agencies. I did a video for you on that as well. I did a whole long Substack. I think I will replay that video, maybe with an additional few comments, and I will republish that Substack. And I'll show you in Kennedy's exact words where he says the number one, that's what he says. He says the most important thing we need to do. Do you agree with him that the most important thing I think he means the government and himself, if he gets into any position of power, he calls it restore confidence in the regulatory agencies. Let's first talk about regulatory agencies. That means the CDC, the FDA, maybe even the Health and Human Services Department, maybe even the WHO. These are agencies that were created unconstitutionally, I might add, in order to oversee and expand government to be in your business and mine. Any of y'all who have ever created a product to sell, maybe a food product or cosmetic product, you have to have all that approved by the FDA. And I've heard of the FDA going after small mom and pop manufacturers who, I don't know, are selling frozen fish sticks or something. And the font on the package was 1.82 large or something like that. And they got slammed by the FDA with our tax dollars. So no, I'm not in favor of expanding any regulatory agency. And then let's talk about his language. Are you with me? I'm an English teacher. Words matter. I would ask Kennedy why he uses the phrase restore confidence. Do you see what's going on here? By saying that he wants to restore confidence, he's inferring that we all had confidence in the FDA back in the day. We all believed the CDC back in the day. Well, I never did. I don't care for this inferring, on a kind of nationwide level that we all believe the FDA back in his uncle's time. I'm going to break down this speech for you in just a moment, where he mentions his uncle and his father 12 or 13 times. This is called by association. He is attempting, in my opinion, and I would ask him, I'd say, RFK, Bobby Jr., are you trying to elevate your status by association by constantly referring to your uncle and your father? And my other question is, and I'll get back to the restoring confidence, but my other question is, if you're constantly referring to your uncle and his reign as president, why don't you ever mention that it was your uncle that signed into law the Vaccine Assistance Act of 1962, which got the ball rolling for all of the states to require children in public school, including into kindergarten, to become human pincushions? Friends, this is where it all started with JFK, with RFK Jr.'s uncle that he's referred to 12 or 13 times in his speech. I would have a question for him. Why don't you ever say, gosh, it's a shame that my uncle, all the great things that he did, it's a shame that he got the ball rolling with all of these states requiring the children to become human pincushions. I've never, ever, I haven't listened to all his speeches by no stretch of the imagination, but I've never, ever heard him even allude to the fact of this dark spot in his uncle's administration. So that's another question I have for him. But the question about restoring confidence in the regulatory agencies, no, I never had confidence. How do you restore something that never existed? Friends, this is what's called critical thinking, looking at the language, digging deeper, looking at any hidden agendas, as I call them, little tongue in cheek there, and trying to figure out what narrative are they pushing. So his narrative that I'm going to conclude based on his statements of the most important or among the most important or the number one thing we need to do is restore confidence in these agencies. Think about it. Could that be so that down the road, once everybody believes in what the CDC says and everybody follows the FDA and the Health and Human Services and maybe even the WHO, once confidence is restored, then of course we'll believe whatever they say. Are you following me here? And the call for the constant safety testing on these jabs so that finally one day you can come out and say, hallelujah, they're safe and effective. Line up for the junior jab. That would be horrible if people fell for that. So that's a question that I think you need to ask them. And these are the questions I'm asking. Let me continue. And let me know in a comment below what questions you have for him. All right. So the basic question, you say you want to increase confidence in the regulatory agencies like the FDA and the CDC. How exactly will you do this? What measurements? Just like when we talk about safety testing on the jabs, how many children will be harmed? How many will get a placebo? How many won't? For how long? For how many years? With which jabs? And under what purpose? And how will you measure whether they work or not? I mean, if there are two children and one gets a jab and one doesn't, and neither gets sick, how do you know that they work? And when you want to start talking about measuring antibodies, how do you even know that that was in response to the jab? There's so much faulty information that goes along with this, not even to mention how we define diseases. I've done lots of videos on that. Watch my interview, my two-part interview with Dr. Sam Bailey and Dr. Mark Bailey. I had to edit out a lot, but the unedited version is for those of you that are my financial supporters, and that is in our monthly webinars, and you'll have a link for that. So we have to define that. How do you define these illnesses and diseases? Because what Dr. Mark and Dr. Sam said is we have symptoms and we have conditions, and all those conditions are wrapped up and packaged, and then they give a name, and that's the disease. All right. What does it mean, restore confidence? How do we measure the confidence? Does that mean people now should listen to the CDC and trust the FDA and trust the Health and Human Services when they tell everybody to stay home and stop breathing? My next question for him: you have consistently said that you are vigorously, fiercely is the word, pro-vaccine. What does that mean? Does that mean all vaccines? Does that mean only the ones that you've had? Does that only mean the ones that you've had your children take? Because you told us that you got all of them jabbed. Again, who is going to pay for the testing of these safety tests? Who is the payment going to? So who's paying for it? Who gets their pockets lined? How can the information be validated and confirmed and trusted? I would like to know that. Okay. Another question for candidate Kennedy. If you are put in charge of an advisory role, for example, and these agencies state down the road that there is evidence now that they've expanded all the safety testing and that there is evidence that these jabs are safe and effective, are you in favor of the government requiring that? You stated in 2019, and here's a question for him, that you are not in favor of unwilling Americans. I'd like you to define the phrase unwilling. To me, unwilling means that you're not doing something that's required of you. I find it a pejorative term, a negative term. So I'd like you to clarify that. Has a negative connotation. You stated that you don't think unwilling Americans should be required to become a human pincushion unless it shows that that jab helps more than harms. My question for you, Kennedy, do you stand by that statement? Have you changed over these last 5 years, or do you still stand by what you say? And if you do, can you clarify that if there are these jabs that help more than harm, as you stated very specifically, succinctly, and unequivocally, does that mean that if these agencies that now we have restored our confidence in, and if there are these tests that show that these jabs are safe and effective, are you in favor of requiring that nationwide? So you're on record to say that, and I want to know exactly what it means. Does that mean you are in favor of the jabs if they do more help than harm? Who will determine that? How do you enforce that? What would the penalty be? All right, simple question. Just want to know which pharmaceutical companies have donated to your campaign. That should be a pretty simple question to ask. And in what amounts? I would like to know that. And which of these companies have donated to your Children's Health Defense nonprofit organization that I looked at, I think had, actually that was Del Bigtree, had about $13 million. I'll have to check to see how much. Give me just a second here. Here we go. Let's take a look. I'm just curious. So this is not his campaign. And so for those of you that do contribute to the Children's Health Defense, then you can just do a quick search online. It's called a Form 990. And so this is for 2022. So in 2022, these are public documents. They received $22.5 million in contributions and grants. That is, oh my gosh, the prior year was 15 million. And you can look at previous years. So it looks like they've been increasing their donations that they've received. And then you can look to see how much the officers are paid. And I think Kennedy gets a little more than $500,000 per year is his salary. $510,000 plus another $3,700. Mary Holland is a director. She gets $180,000, and then you can see the others are a lot of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 people are making over 6 figures, well into the 6 figures. So good for them. They've got plenty of money to do what they need to do, which I'm not quite sure where all that money goes. But just to say, I'm curious as to how much of that 22 million comes in from the pharmaceutical companies. Okay. So, and I'm not saying they do. It's a question that I have. Fair question. I don't have any information about that. Okay. So again, just clarifying this question that he refers to his uncle many times. He was the one who implemented the federal government assistance for these vaccination programs in public schools. Why don't you call to repeal that? Because to this day, the CDC is still giving grants to these schools. That's why your child can be pulled in without you knowing and get jabbed. And plenty of parents probably don't even know that that's what happened to their child. And it's because of JFK. So RFK Jr.'s uncle that he refers to all the time. Okay, here's another question. Why don't you ever point out that that is a flaw in his administration? All right. Kennedy, you are a resident in the state of California. California has among the strictest requirements for children in K-12 to be able to go to school. Why haven't you worked to repeal those laws? Okay. And what work exactly have you done to repeal the 1986 Act that stripped the pharmaceutical companies of their liability? All right. We talked about his website with all of the vaccine safety. Okay. I think those are the main questions that I have for him. And I did want to point out a couple of things in his statement of joining forces with Trump. So let me just share my screen. And again, I don't want to get you seasick as I scroll through, but I just wanted to let you know that this is where I got the information. And it's literally in black and white and I guess green and yellow. And he mentions democracy several times. He only mentioned freedom 2 or 3 times. So that's another question I have for him. So everything in yellow here is either about democracy or about children. And he talks about, here we have it, the Democratic Party abandoned democracy. Actually, I'm just going to read from it so you don't have to follow along. And then he talks about, he wants to show everyone that democracy is still possible in this country. He mentions his father and uncle several times. He said that he wants democracy to still be alive at the grassroots. He said that the Democratic Party itself is not saving democracy. And he says it's profoundly undemocratic and that America's image abroad should be improved because of our nation's role as the template for democracy. And then he talked about abandoning democracy. The duty of a free press is to safeguard democracy. There's been an attack on democracy. The one thing we need to do as citizens and a democracy is to figure out what our democracy still looks like. Are we still a role model for democracy? It goes on and on and on. And so as I say, he mentions this more over a dozen times. So my question for Kennedy is, how do you define democracy? And you did not mention once in your speech anything about our constitutional republic. So my question for Kennedy is, how do you define democracy? How do you define our political system? Is our political system, is our form of government a constitutional republic? I've heard you refer to it, I think, as a constitutional democracy, or maybe you referred to it as you did not refer to it as a constitutional republic. I know that. And my question is, why? Why are you so reluctant to use that phrase? And we do have democratic elements in our country where we do have the right to vote. But I'll give you a simple example as to how our country is not a pure democracy, because we have an electoral college. So we vote for our electors who then cast their ballots for the president. That's why we don't have a popular vote for president, because we're not a democracy. We are a republic, a constitutional republic. A democracy is of the people, certainly. A republic is of the people, but a democracy does not have guardrails. A constitutional republic, ideally, and I can see that has been trampled on very frequently, the Constitution serves as the guardrails. Laws that are created that are repugnant to the Constitution, that are in violation of the Constitution, are not valid. And there are plenty, probably thousands and thousands in the state of California that are in violation of the California Constitution and the United States Constitution. So a constitutional republic is the form of government we have. And I'm not going to assume that you're using the word democracy like a socialist, because socialists use the word democracy quite a bit, and it kind of is a step towards socialism. So I'm not going to assume that that's the reason why you're using it. So I'm asking you, why do you continue to use the word democracy and you don't talk about restoring freedom or restoring our constitutional republic or restoring our Constitution? Another question I have for you is, in your statement, You mentioned saving children about 7 times, and you have spoken very persuasively, and you've brought quite a bit of important information to the forefront about children suffering from conditions that many parents and many in possibly even in your organization believe are the result of these jabs. And I just want to use a couple of your phrases here, and I have a question for you about the importance of saving children. So you talk about the war on our children. You also spoke about the war on Ukraine, but you never mentioned the war on Israel, just as an aside. You do speak about ending unjust wars. So my question for you is what's happening in Palestine, in Gaza, is that a just war in your opinion? Are those actions taken by Netanyahu's administration, do you support them and why? I would like to know that. So that's another question I have for you. I've never, in this speech, you didn't mention Israel at all. And I know it's quite a divisive topic. And most people, when they think about it, they are, it's very repugnant and repulsive to consider the number of innocents that are being slaughtered who have no participation in what's going on. Okay, the other thing I want to know is, again, speaking about the children, you say, I feel a moral obligation. I'm reading right from your transcript. Again, I'm speaking to Kennedy, asking him these questions. I feel a moral obligation to use this opportunity to save millions of children above all things. In case you don't realize how dire the condition is of our children's health and chronic disease in general. So I want to mention, then he says again that the CDC, he's referring to the CDC a couple of times, says that we are the sickest people on earth. So again, that is inferring that we should listen to the CDC and trust the CDC and restore confidence in the CDC. And then he talks about when his uncle was president, that juvenile diabetes was effectively non-existent. And now 1 out of every 3 kids is diabetic or pre-diabetic. He goes on. And my concern is, Kennedy, why do you believe this is the government's role to do something about? I personally don't believe that the government is responsible for children's diabetes or my health or your health. Why are you placing so much emphasis on the government's intrusion and giving them the responsibility to do something about children and their health? I don't understand that. I'd like you to clarify. Then he goes on to say, our children. He goes on to talk about the autism rates, and he says, why are we allowing this to happen to our children? Okay, who is we? I don't understand the we. Why are we allowing this to happen to our children? Whose children? We each have our own children. He said, children are the most precious assets that we have in this country. How can we let this happen to them? He goes on and on about the antidepressants and diagnosis of mental health issues and the ultra-processed sugar. And trust me, I agree with all of that. I agree that children are unhealthier than ever, and they probably are being prescribed medications excessively. I agree with that. I don't agree with it being the government's issue. I don't agree with expanded government. I don't agree with more of your tax dollars going to the government. I don't agree with testing on children or innocent animals. And I just have a completely different view on this. And then he talks again about his uncle. When my uncle was president of our country, we spent $0 on chronic diseases. Today, the government healthcare is almost all for chronic diseases. Well, why is that? It certainly isn't working. Then he goes on to say, we need to root out the corruption in our health agencies. So again, I think we need to shrink them and remove any kind of power or authority they have. I'm going in the complete opposite direction here. All right. Then he goes on to say that he is going to, along with Trump, staff these agencies, the CDC, the FDA, the HSS, with honest scientists and doctors who are free from industry funding. I love that idea. I'd love to see it come to fruition. How reasonable do you think that is? Do you think that's going to happen? Then he goes on to say, we're going to bring healthy food back to school lunches. I'm all in favor of that, but I'm not in favor of children going to public school. So again, I have a little different approach here. I do agree, stop subsidizing the worst foods. I completely agree with that. In fact, I agree with no subsidies. How do you like them apples? I'll take it. I'll see your subsidies and I'll raise you no subsidies. All right. He talks about getting the toxic chemicals out of our food. Well, I'll tell you what, if you eat natural, healthy, organic food, you don't have to worry about the toxic chemicals if you're not eating the junk food. Okay. Then he says that for 19 years, he prayed every morning that God would put him in a position to end the calamity of the chronic disease crisis. So I'd like to know how you are going to do that. I really am curious because it sounds like, again, you're giving all of this power and authority to the government. Isn't it about individual choices? Yeah, I'm in favor of education over regulation. I don't think I made that up, but it has a good ring to it. He said we will make Americans healthy again. We being the government, again, more government involvement. I'm not in favor of that. That's just me. I'm in favor of limited government, individual liberty, individual choices, not the government and big daddy government and these regulatory agencies getting in my personal health choices. Okay, he wants to restore national health. Okay, question, what is national health? How do you measure it? There's individual health. I can measure it by knowing how good I feel or what have you, but how do you measure national health and how do you restore national health? I would like to know what your plan is for that and what it means actually before you can even implement a plan. Then he says he wants to be able to look himself in the mirror. He said, knowing that I could have saved that if he refused the opportunity of joining with Trump, he said, I would not be able to look myself in the mirror knowing that I could have saved the lives of countless children and I could reverse this country's chronic disease epidemic. That's pretty tall order. I love optimism. Then he says, even if there's a small chance of saving these kids, ultimately the only thing that will save our country and our children is if we choose to love our kids more than we hate each other. And that's why I launched my campaign to unify America. And my dad and my uncle made such an enduring mark on the character of our nation. So again, mentioning his father half a dozen times and his uncle. And then he said, the most unifying theme for all Americans is that we all love our children and we all must unite around that issue. So he mentions children, saving children at least 7 times. Again, democracy about 12 times, uncle, father, half a dozen. 0 times did he mention vaccines. 0 times did he mention the right to medical choices. And he never, in all of this talking about saving children, you know what he left out? He said, saving the children is number 1. The only thing, he said, and I quote, that will save our country and our children is if we choose to love our kids more than we hate each other. My question for you, Bobby, why are you in favor of abortion? Why don't you speak out vehemently and vigorously against the worst actions of all, taking the lives of these innocent children? I'd like to know about that. And I'm mentioning it because you yourself created this statement that says the number 1, this is my conclusion based on what you've said several times. Well, I'll just quote you again. The only thing that will save our country and save our children is if we choose to love our kids more than we hate each other. Well, let's choose to love all of them, shall we? And why not, when you're talking about expanding these agencies and so forth, why not less money to Planned Parenthood if you want to give away government money? Why not more money to help pregnant women? Yes, the females, right, that get pregnant, those that are worried, vulnerable, scared in a situation and they don't know what to do. Why not expand help for those individuals? Why not expand adoption? Why not expand more education about not getting pregnant in the first place? If you love children above all, and loving children more than anything is your number one principle here, I'm curious as to why you didn't mention the horrors that are perpetrated upon these innocents in the name of reproductive rights. There's no right for these innocents whose lives are being taken. Those are the questions that I have for Kennedy. Friends, some of you are asking me who I'm going to vote for. Well, I'm certainly not going to vote for Kamala. And many of my followers here don't vote at all because they believe that it is just perpetuating a broken system. We could have a whole conversation about the ear election and the selection in another video, but this video, and let me say one more thing. There will be plenty of people on the channel saying, why aren't you asking these questions about Trump? Well, because this video is about Kennedy. All right. I'm also not talking about the spraying in the skies on this video, and I'm not talking about the unnatural fires in this video, because this video was about Kennedy. So that's why I have questions for Kennedy. Thank you, everybody, for being on board. I appreciate hearing from you. Let me know in a comment below what questions you have for Kennedy. And if you support Kennedy and Trump, then it's up to you to pose these questions like I have these discussions to further expand our awareness and knowledge of these candidates. And at the end of the day, it's in God's hands, and we need to do our own individual best, live our life, live our freedom, make those choices that make sense for us. And for heaven's sakes, to not put all of our trust and all of our hope and all of our dreams into mortal man. Thanks for being on board, everybody. And I'll see you in an upcoming broadcast. By the way, you can get this summary at my Substack, which is free, peggyhall.substack.com.